the AMT model kits. This is episode 24.
You're listening to 70s Trek with Bob Turner and Kelly Casto, the fan podcast that looks at Star Trek in the 1970s. It was the decade that built a franchise.
Welcome to 70s Trek. This week we ask you to think back to those youthful days when your basement smelled like airplane glue and your fingers stuck together. I'm Bob Turner.
Oh, and I'm Kelly Casto.
You can come in there anytime, Kelly.
Anytime. On this episode, we discuss the Star Trek model kits that AMT produced in the 70s. We'll talk about our bad paint jobs, our melted plastic, and, kind of getting a little high on paint, on glue.
Shh. We're not supposed to talk about that part.
One dab for the model, one sniff for me.
Oh, my goodness.
But first, here's how you can reach us. Visit us on Facebook at facebook.com/70s Trek. Feel free to leave us a comment or a question.
You can also find 70s Trek on iTunes. Just search 70s Trek in the podcast area. If you like the show, please leave us a rating or a review. This helps other Star Trek fans find the show. I'm listening to this, kind of tapping my toe, and I'm just imagining a young Kelly Casto listening to a song like this, sniffing glue. Kelly,
that was in my youth. I'm reformed these days.
Did you own any of these AMT model kits?
Well, of course I did. I had the Enterprise, of course. I think my first one though was the exploration kit, the one that had the tricorder, phaser, and communicator.
Yeah.
The bridge had to have the bridge.
Yeah.
And the Galileo, the shuttle.
Absolutely. So let's dive into it. Let's talk about these models a little bit. And then as we go through it, I'm sure we're going to reminisce as well.
Oh, gosh.
I have to tell you, I had them all. I had them all. I love them all. And I can't tell you, for anybody who built the Enterprise, I think I built the Enterprise maybe 3 or 4 times in the 70s. And the thing that I had the hardest time was melting the plastic, because I used too much glue. I can remember I must have been, 9 or 10 years old on my first Enterprise kit. And the socket where the struts would snap into, well, they didn't snap, where you place them into, man, I filled that thing with glue. I'm thinking to myself, there's no way these things are coming off. And then all of a sudden the struts start to bend as the plastic was melting.
Yep. Oh, yeah. I think I did the same thing on the struts. Maybe not melting, but it definitely disformed.
Oh, my God. It was horrible. So my parents were nice enough to get me another one, I don't know, a couple months later. And the first one, I took a torch to it, and I named it the Constellation.
There weren't any firecrackers involved, like blowing it up?
No, and I have to be honest with you, I'm not sure how I got away with using my father's acetylene torch, but I remember doing that. And the smell of burning plastic brought my mom downstairs. I think it was like the summertime, and she was like, "What in the hell are you doing down here?"
Oh, my gosh.
I'm melting plastic, Mom.
Yeah, we won't tell your dad.
No, please don't. And then, the inevitable question as she looked at me was like, do you really think this is a good idea?
Well, always at the time, it's a good idea. Afterwards is when you second think it.
And then I discovered The soldering iron. Oh, I took that bad boy to those model kits. I loved messing with the soldering iron and the mod plastic and just.
Yeah, that was a little bit more controlled melting.
Yeah, a little more controlled. That's right. Hey, why don't we talk a little history with these model kits?
Sure. So let's start. How did AMT get the rights? So July 1966, the execs at AMT, Aluminum Metal Toys, I think we'll talk about that a little bit later, at least the name, they saw the preview for the upcoming show Star Trek. By August 1st, they acquired the license to produce the Star Trek model kits.
They didn't mess around, did they?
No, not at all.
This is the pre-internet, pre-cell phone era. Man, they were moving fast.
Oh, yeah. Yep. So they announced that the Enterprise would be their very first one. But so here's the good, or the interesting thing, I guess, is the deal was that they got the license in exchange for building this full-scale exterior model of the shuttlecraft.
Isn't that cool?
Yeah, and then they did the interior sets, and I wasn't clear in my research were the interior sets of what was inside the shuttle.
Yeah, right. Yes, exactly. So
right.
When you're seeing them flying, yeah, AMT built that part too.
Right.
Which was a separate set.
Right, and just what a deal! I mean, Star Trek needed the money.
Seriously.
AMT wanted the money, so good deal.
It was a very good deal. And in a future show, we're going to talk about the Galileo and the Shuttlecraft, and we'll kind of dive into this a little bit deeper. But that story is really, really interesting. The first model was released in that year in '66. Boy, they got that thing together really fast. Last week, we talked about the Enterprise, and we talked about, was that last week? Anyway, no. Whenever that was. Recently, we talked about the Enterprise. See how I covered myself?
Yes, there you go.
And we talked about how there had been a 36-inch production model made, sort of a study model. Well, the guys over at AMT got their hands on the 36-inch production model, and they used that to create the dies and the molds, I should say, for the Enterprise model that AMT would produce later on. What's really cool is the original version had battery-operated lights. Oh, come on!
I know. I'm so jealous.
Are you kidding me? That's awesome, because by the time I'm playing with them, they didn't have any battery, lights. What the heck? Why didn't you leave those in there?
Oh, I know. I mean, I think the first time I saw the lights really was when we were in college, Bob.
And I think it was like an add-on kit, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Like you could build the kit, and then you could also buy the light kit and add on to it.
Right.
Oh, can you imagine how cool that must have been?
Oh, my.
The models were 18 inches long, which is, a foot and a half. That's a pretty decent-sized model. And it was so popular that it remained in the AMT catalog for nearly 30 years. It's kind of interesting because obviously the AMT kits copied what was on screen, but then they themselves ended up on screen as well. It was a smashed up Enterprise kit that served as the U.S.S. Constellation in the episode Doomsday Machine. And in the background of the office aboard Deep Space Station K7, you can see the Enterprise kind of through a window. Well, that also is an AMT model kit in the episode The Trouble with Tribbles.
Oh, jeez.
Isn't that cool?
That is. So,
go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say, in 1968, AMT released the Klingon Battle Cruiser. This, to me, is really interesting. It was specifically designed for AMT by Matt Jeffries, the designer of the Enterprise. It had not appeared on screen yet. And I think we talked about this in an earlier episode, too. Right. Every time every time we heard the name Klingons, we never saw the ship in the first and second season. We never got to see a Klingon battle cruiser until the third season. And when you watched it in the 70s through syndication, and sometimes the shows were out of order or they just continually rotated through, you kind of forget that fact. So there you go.
Yep. And these two, they were the only models released during the original series run, right?
The battle cruiser, the Klingon Battle Cruiser and the Enterprise, I think you're right.
Right.
The only ones released during the run of the show. In the early 70s then, as the show goes into syndication and becomes more and more popular, of course, that creates the animated series, which continues to build on the popularity. And AMT says, hey, you know what? We need to release some more models, make some money off of this. They released a Spock statue. Now, if you've probably seen this, it's a statue of Mr. Spock with a phaser in one hand and a communicator in the other, and he's fighting what looks like a three-headed snake. Have you seen? It's kind of a funky looking thing because we never saw it in the show.
No, I know.
And
I was a purist back then, and I saw it on the shelf. I'm like, I can't have that. That was no scene at Star Trek that I've ever seen.
My God, I had like the same reaction. There were so many good Spock moments. You can't pick a moment out of the show and create a model from that? Really? Right. Yeah. I never had that one. I never had the Spock statue. Sorry, Spock.
Me either.
Live long and prosper. In 74, AMT released the Galileo 7 shuttlecraft.
Yeah.
This was cool. Wasn't it cool to have this one? This one was what, about, I'm holding it in my hands right now. Looks to me 7 or 8 inches.
Right.
Had all the great decals, man. You could open it up. Because if I remember correctly, you built the interior, and then the top part of the shuttlecraft came down over top of that. So you could actually lift that away. You could see the seats inside.
Yep.
I liked it. It wasn't something I really, really liked when watching the show, but I have to tell you, I liked the Galileo as a model, and then also it became a toy. Heck yeah, I played with it.
Yeah, I think I liked it better
hand,
as a model. I mean, it was easier to put together. It was more stable.
It was easier to put together. Yes. Yes, because if you're trying to put the Enterprise together and you're trying to put the struts, the engine struts into the secondary hull, the hull's rounded. And so you're constantly sort of fidgeting and trying to keep it stable as you're attaching the struts, and then you have to hold them in place. And I agree with you. It was more of a gamble in a way, because you could also snap the saucer section into place, but you were never sure if it was going to be level.
Right.
I remember turning it upside down, so the engines would lay flat, and then the saucer would sort of lay flat, and playing with the secondary hull, trying to make sure everything lined up just so.
I know.
Did you do that too?
Oh, gosh, yes. And then when it wasn't just right, or one of the nacelles is kind of cockeyed to the other, oh, my gosh.
I'm an idiot. I can't put together a model.
I know.
I'm stupid.
I know. So the Galileo was kind of a relief.
Yes, it went together very easily.
Yes.
All right, I have to bring this up since we're talking about putting models together. How many times did you get a little bit of glue on your finger or thumb and then touch the surface of the model? Oh my God, there's my fingerprint.
I know.
And it won't go away.
Yep. And then you get that fine sandpaper. I don't know if you ever did that, and try to sand it down. And then
you have
sanding away
scratches.
Details of the.
Yes.
And then you get some scratches potentially. Oh my gosh. And then you try and paint it.
Well, and the Enterprise, if you remember, the early models were very smooth.
Yes.
There wasn't there wasn't a lot of detail. So you're right, because I did try sandpaper once, and you end up with these scratches, and you're like, it looks worse. I should have left a fingerprint.
Right. I'd put a glob of paint on it, just hoping it fills in. I can't see it.
Not so much.
Yeah.
Or I'd loved it when you globbed the glue on, between the two halves of the saucer section, for example, and put them together, and then it gooped out.
Yes.
And you've got this goop of glue, and you just touched the surface with your finger and left a fingerprint. Well, now you're like looking at the glue going, how do I get this glue off?
Oh,
what do I do? Oh, crap.
Right.
And the first time you do it, you smear it with your finger. You're like, okay, that didn't work well, and I'm never doing that again. It's just a big smear of glue.
Yep. I had one that the saucer section, it wasn't one of the top or bottom, I forget which. It wasn't a perfect fit. There was a gap. I'm like, oh my God, what do I do? God. And I wasn't one to use heat, but it crossed my mind. So
what were you thinking of doing? Melting them?
Yeah, just kind of melt it into place, reform it. And of course, I've already glued it. So because there's no pre-fitting, it's just I gotta get it together as fast as I can.
Do you remember some of the versions? Like there were different versions of the model. Some of the versions had sort of like a peg on the top half of the saucer, and then there was a little round hollow column that the peg fit into.
Yes.
And it was a pain in the butt getting those lined up.
Oh my gosh.
So you'd get it all glued, you'd get your glue in the column holes and getting ready, and you're like, I can't get it lined up. Plus, you don't want to touch where the glue is, and so you're kind of holding it like not very securely, and it's, oh my God.
Yep. And being a kid that was young, I want it together as fast as I can.
So I can play with it.
Right. So it's all just kind of a frustrating mess, but oh my gosh, I loved it.
Absolutely. Let's talk about the next model kit. This one was one of my favorites. It's from 1974. It's the Exploration set. This was awesome.
I loved it.
The phaser, the communicator, and the tricorder. And you could put them all together and then go play. It was so cool. Because if you remember, too, I don't think that the handheld... Do you remember the handheld phasers that were sort of like a game, but they had a little light bulb? And
oh, yeah.
I think we were... This is a year earlier than that. So we hadn't seen those yet. So as you're watching the show and you're watching the animated series and you're like, oh, my God, I want to go play Star Trek, but I don't have anything. I had a buddy who... and I've probably told this story, I tell it all the time, who built a phaser out of popsicle sticks. Remember the wooden popsicle sticks?
Yeah.
So he kind of glued some popsicle sticks together, and he had the angled hand grip, and then he had found, I forget what the heck it was, but he found something for the front that looked like the front firing portion of the phaser, and he had a phaser, and he painted it up. And you know what he used for a communicator? Do you remember sucrets?
Oh, yeah.
And the tin that the sucrets came in?
Oh, that's a good idea.
So he had painted up the sucrets tin and had glued some buttons in there and had gotten some kind of cloth around a ring for the speaker part. And he had this flip open communicator made out of a sucrets box.
Oh, my gosh.
And a handheld phaser made out of popsicle sticks. And I thought he was the coolest kid I know. I thought he was awesome. His name was Danny Battleline. Danny, if you're listening, awesome job with the phaser and the communicator. I was so jealous.
Obviously still are.
A little bit, yeah. I have to admit it, a little bit. If that had been me, they'd be on my shelf somewhere in my office in a very, very special place with a light shining on them.
And every time you looked at it, it would go, ooh.
That's right. You'd hear the angels sing, ah, and the light would glow. And yeah, absolutely. I thought the exploration set was great because finally you could build something, you could play with it a little bit. I still have the communicator.
Do you?
I still have the communicator. It's the only thing from my childhood that I still have. And it's awesome. I love it. Every once in a while I'll pull it out and,
That's funny. The longest I had of any of those was the tricorder. I love the tricorder. I beat the crap out of the phaser communicator playing with them.
Yep.
But the tricorder, you don't play with it like you do the phaser and communicator. But I just love that.
It was great. Yeah, because you could glue them together, take them outside, and play with them. Yeah, I can remember busting the phaser and then gluing it back together and playing with it again.
Yep. I was ticked on the communicator when the flip top came off and I couldn't get it back on finally. I'm just like, okay, I'm frustrated.
Yep. Can I have another model kit?
Yes. Yeah, exactly.
Please? All right, let's talk about 1975. Obviously, AMT was seeing some big results from these model kits because in 1975, they went ahead and released 3 more that same year. The first was the Romulan Bird of Prey. This was a pretty cool kit. You already had the Enterprise, you had the Klingon Battle Cruiser. Now here comes the Romulan Bird of Prey, and it even had the big decal of the Bird of Prey. Do you remember trying to put that sucker on?
Oh my gosh!
Because it was huge.
It was huge, yeah. And so getting it on right, and wasn't that the decals you had to put in water?
Yes, you had to have warm water. Yeah. Yeah. And so you're placing it on the model, and you're like, oh, that's not right. And you're trying to move it around before it starts to stick. And as you're doing it, you're like, oh God, it's starting to stick. It's starting to stick. And you'd get more water. At least I would. I'd get more water and like wetting it down. Come on, don't dry out yet.
Well, and the whole time I'm using my fingers and wasn't smart enough to use like tweezers or something.
You remember using your fingers and you'd finally get it right where you want it. You'd pull your hand away and the decal would come off on your fingers.
Yep.
Oh my God, no.
Yep.
It's drying out.
If I remember right, that big one, that happened to me, but it ripped. The decal ripped.
All right. How about the little decals that came with the Enterprise? Especially the ones that went on the side, like on the lower section, on the engineering section, the red ones.
Yep.
I ripped a couple of those. It was like, oh no.
Yep.
Crap. So you'd put like it was like a quarter inch of the ripped piece on first, and then kind of line up the rest of it, and you'd be looking at it. Oh crap! It's at an angle, and you try to. It's drying though. Get me water. Yeah.
Doesn't sound like we had fun, but oh my God,
did we have fun? It was great fun. I trade it all to go do that again.
Me too.
Yeah, but that Bird of Prey decal was something special. That was pretty cool.
It was.
What was it about? Probably 5 or 6 inches, wasn't it?
Oh, heck.
It was big. It was a big decal.
It had to have been at least 5 or 6, yeah. It was big.
It was. Also in 1975, which I think is one of the coolest models, the Enterprise bridge.
Yes, that's the first model that I really took excruciating time to paint.
Now, did you paint the pieces first?
Yes.
I did the same thing. When you went to glue the pieces, did the paint come off?
Oh, of course.
I hated that.
Well, and I mean, I'm kind of try to be a perfectionist anyways, and I think that was the kit that sent me over the edge, and just really detailed painting and everything that I go to glue them together. And gosh darn it, the paint's running from the glue. Oh my gosh, everything.
Yes, all of that.
All of that.
Yeah, that was and it had the little figures. If you remember, it had had a little figure of Kirk. I think it had a figure of Spock, didn't it? Standing up. Kirk was in his chair. Spock was standing up. Yep. Were there any other figures? I don't think. Were there?
Gosh.
I know. I can't remember. And then there was a little decal on the view screen, which...
Right.
Was it a Romulan Bird of Prey? Am I remembering that correctly? Anyway, I can remember trying to get that decal in the little square. And again, it's like, oh my God, it's not right.
Yep. Yep. But as we're talking about it, so I glued Kirk into the chair, and that was the one that I got the paint and the glue messed up, and I got it on his his shirt.
Yes. Right. I did all that. Yet it was still pretty cool, wasn't it?
Yep. I think it was Sulu or Chekhov, one of the two.
That was a very cool model.
Yeah, I think there was 3 figures.
Very cool model. And if I remember, it was what? Wasn't it open on like a quarter of it, or a half of it was open, right?
Yeah. About half of it.
Yeah. This other model that came out in 1976 was also one of my favorites, Deep Space Station K7. This was just a cool model. to have the K7 space station from The Trouble with Tribbles.
Yep.
I always thought it was a great design. And it came with a small Enterprise. You just doubled my fun. So I've got the K7, and now I've got a small Enterprise. Oh, this is the best. Are you kidding me? Yeah, that was a cool kit.
Yeah, that's the one I didn't have.
It was very nice. It would have been great had it come with a lighting kit, because it had these translucent domes. Remember the sort of cone? Actually, they're cones, really. Translucent cones that go on top of each section. Oh, man, that was waiting. It was crying out for some kind of light in there. That would have been very cool. But, yeah, that's a great model. I enjoyed that one. It wasn't my favorite, but I enjoyed it. I thought it was really good.
I think looking at the pictures, it's very interesting design.
Yep. Very interesting design.
And it had a baby Enterprise.
You can't beat that.
So there was another kit that AMT created, and it was a design by Matt Jeffries. It was a starship, and it was called the Leif Erikson.
Yeah.
Did you remember seeing that? I mean, I remember seeing it in the store. I never had it.
I never had it either. I remember seeing it in the store. I remember seeing it in the back of comic books or in magazines or things like that. Yeah, it was kind of triangular shaped, and it had these bay doors and I want to call it a neck, but it wasn't the neck. It was somewhere along the body of the ship that opened up, and this little scout ship came out.
Right.
And Matt Jeffries designed it.
Yeah, it was. I mean, the design it kind of looked sort of like a cross between maybe a Concorde and a spaceship. It kind of pointing at the front, and it got a little wider, like you said, as it goes back, and the bay door and the engines were cool because they were on the side.
Yeah. And then didn't they release a version of this later that glowed?
Yes, and they called it UFO.
That's right. Which had nothing to do with the TV show, did it?
No, nothing. And that's actually the first one I saw that glowed, and I'm like, oh, UFO. Hey, wait. That's because I distinctly remember that's not the TV show.
Yeah, right. That doesn't have anything to do with the TV show.
Nothing at all.
Stinkers.
So in 1979, AMT released some new models around the Star Trek the Motion Picture, right?
Yeah.
And there was the refit of the U.S.S. Enterprise, a Vulcan warp shuttle, and the Klingon Battle Cruiser.
The Katinga class.
The Katinga class, yeah.
The Enterprise model, I just thought was stunning. I thought it was beautiful. I think it translated so well as an AMT model kit from what you saw on the screen. It was, again, at that time I'm a teenager, but it was still easy to paint. It was easy to put together. Very nice model. Love that model.
Yes.
Did you have it?
I didn't have it. It was, but I remember it, and the detail on it, I just thought it just blew me away compared to what I had put together, several years earlier.
Yeah, compared to the TV show Enterprise that AMT put out, there was a ton of detail. The impulse engines on the back of the saucer section, so much detail there. You had a bunch of detail on the engines that were lacking in the TV show. A lot of that detail that went into the film model, because you can see more on film.
Right.
Translated over to the model pretty well.
Yeah, well, I like the lines, and I always liked that level of detail because it felt more real to me, with the different, it felt like sections on the body, with little windows.
And that ship is a Matt Jeffries design again. I mean, what's interesting about that is how well and how easily he was able to update that basic design of the Enterprise for the movie too. I think we talked about that before as well, but boy, that update, just those little few tweaks he made for the movie, it sets that model apart.
Oh, I think that model or this series of models just it elevated the Star Trek models in general, and everybody had to catch up if they were doing anything like that for any other TV series or movie.
Yeah, it did. I agree with you. Of course, as the 80s went on, came the Next Generation and a whole new line of models with that show and with DS9 and Voyager and Enterprise. But it wasn't always AMT making those models, mainly because, well, the company went out of existence really in 1977. The history of the company is this. It was originally known as Aluminum Metal Toys, AMT, and it began operations in 1948 in Troy, Michigan, in the heartland in Michigan. And it made American cars and trucks, and it made these little model kits out of aluminum. The Star Trek line in 1966, it was the first time AMT had done anything other than cars and trucks before.
Right. And the models started becoming popular then too, like the mid 60s.
Yes.
The model kits. And that really was one of the first times in the 60s that movies, TV shows, and whatnot started to become popular, and it wasn't just cars and trucks.
Yep, exactly. I think you're right. As we said, AMT sort of ended its existence as an independent company in 1977. It was acquired by Lesney Products, and those are the folks that made Matchbox cars. Remember the little Matchbox cars?
Yep.
They're still out there. Competitors
Yep.
with Hot Wheels.
Yeah, well, some of these, the motion picture models actually says Matchbox on the box.
Oh, I didn't know that. Okay. Well, in 1981, the die-cast toy and model kit manufacturer Ertl acquired AMT from Lesney. So no more Matchbox company. Now it's owned by the company Ertl. They went forward as AMT Ertl. And eventually that company was bought out. Today, these model kits are being reproduced by a company called Round 2, who bought the licensing rights and end up having the molds for these original model kits. So you can still go out and buy them. You can find them on Amazon or other online retailers. All you need to do is do a Google search for AMT model kits, Star Trek, or AMT Star Trek model kits, whatever variation of words you want to use. Bam, they'll pop right up.
And be sure to look for, if it doesn't come with lights, light kits.
Isn't that the coolest thing? Yes, you can buy light kits for some of these models now. They're designed for the kits.
They are.
That's so cool. We should do that.
We should.
When we're done with this podcast, let's build a model with lights in it.
We should. I might not get past the glue, though. I have that problem.
I'm afraid of how many fingerprints it might have stuck on the hole.
I'm going to wear gloves, I guess.
Yeah, right. I used to imagine, I don't know, we're talking early 70s, when I probably built my first Enterprise model. I can remember thinking, boy, I wish I had one of these that was 6 feet long.
Yes.
Well, I don't know what the heck I thought I was going to do with that thing, but I wanted one that was 6 feet long.
You're always over ambitious. I just wanted one about 3 feet.
3 feet.
Something I could lift.
3 feet would have been awesome. You know, there's some great pictures of Roddenberry in the 70s in his office at Paramount, and on his desk is that 3-foot model. And I agree with you, man. I've always looked at that going, oh, man, that would look good on my desk.
Yes, it would.
I would put it right here.
And I'd have to get another desk.
Yeah, probably would. Have one desk for the model, one desk for everything else. Any closing thoughts, Kel?
Just no. You always do that to me.
Strong finish, as usual. I appreciate that. But next week, just in time for Christmas, we will talk about the Star Trek toys from the 1970s.
We'll see you then.
Thanks for listening to 70s Trek, an independent fan production. Join us next week as we explore more about the production, the actors, the producers, and the influencers of Star Trek in the lost decade of the 1970s on 70s Trek.